Well, hello friends, and welcome back to another video. Today, what I'd like to talk to you about is whirling disease has been discovered in Georgia. We're going to talk about what whirling disease is, its sighting here in Georgia, and what it means for the fishery locally as well as fisheries overall throughout the United States. So let's get into it. First, what is whirling disease? Whirling disease is a parasite that affects salmonids such as trout, salmon, etc. Everything in that family it specifically targets. The parasite targets fry and fingerling, so juvenile fish are very susceptible to the parasite, and it makes its home here in their bone and cartilage structure. Now, it's highly fatal to these young fish, 90% fatal to be exact. But if the young fish survives to adulthood carrying whirling disease, they end up looking like this or like this, and when they swim in a corkscrew or whirling pattern, hence the name of the disease. Now, this makes them highly susceptible to predators. It's also very difficult for them to feed, and obviously they just look freaking crazy. Now, we've known about whirling disease for about a century. It started in Europe, specifically Germany, I believe, is where it was first observed, and then it started to spread out. It was first observed in the United States in 1958 in Pennsylvania. Now, we have not had a case of whirling disease whatsoever in the state of Georgia up until about a week ago. Everybody on the mailing list for the Georgia Department of Natural Resources received an email that whirling disease had been observed at one of our hatcheries. The DNR is suspending operations at that hatchery until they can get this under control. What ends up happening is whirling disease begins usually in hatcheries and with farm-raised fish, and then is released unknowingly into the local fishery, and therefore starts to infect wild fish and everything that goes along with that. This actually happened in the 80s in Colorado. There was an accidental release of an infected fish from a hatchery, and it then got out into the system. So the DNR is doing their best to get their arms around this thing so that we don't have an outbreak in our rivers and streams and even lakes that carry trout. And I really hope, I'm hearing good things. I'm hearing that progress is being made and that they're being very careful to take all precautions and get this taken care of, but this is a hard thing to get a hold of because it is a parasite, it is internal, and you don't really know that something is wrong until you get that adult fish with the crooked spine and the bizarre swimming pattern. And what's even worse is if those fish die, which is part of the life cycle of the parasite, when they die in the water, they have become a release point for the parasite to get into the waterway. And that's what we have to avoid. It's why the DNR has suspended operations at that specific hatchery and is taking a really close look at other hatcheries as well to make sure we don't have something larger on our hands. In the short term in Georgia, this is going to affect the fishing. There's no doubt about it. There's going to be less fish. There are not going to be stocking from this hatchery, which is going to disrupt the stocking schedule and just make, it's just gonna make it more difficult. The fish are gonna be less plentiful. Now, in the long term, it will be interesting to see the downstream effects if that is actually a positive in some small way, because now these wild fish might have an opportunity to outcompete and not have to worry about the competition from an influx of stocked fish so often. this could be good. It could be like a bit of a reset for the wild populations. We'll see if that comes to pass. I am worried about what this says for the United States in general. If you look at the map of whirling disease and where it's been in the United States thus far, there are infections up here on the eastern seaboard. As I mentioned, first observed in Pennsylvania. It's spread out from there. In the west, there's also been some observation of whirling disease. And as I mentioned before, also the Colorado release in the 80s is largely responsible for that. But in the middle of the country and down here in the south, you don't see so much. And this is our very first time experiencing this here in Georgia, and that is concerning. We don't want this to spread. And it's one of those things that can spread pretty easily because when these fish die, they are now like a release point, like a mushroom that releases a bunch of spores. Bam, here comes all these parasites and they start infecting down the line. And that is something that should concern all of us who like to fish, no matter where you are. Seeing it in a new state is highly concerning. It's also difficult to get a handle on because it's not like other invasive species or parasites that can hitch a ride on the bottom of your wading boots or on a boat that you take from waterway to waterway, and you have certain mitigations that you can take to make sure that you're not taking those with you. This, unfortunately, is obviously inside the fish, and we don't really know that until we start seeing the corkscrew swimming in the bizarre spinal structure. So the DNR really has to get their arms around this, and I hear, like I said, I hear good things. I really think they're going to be able to do it, but it is also likely that whirling disease is something that we're going to have to deal with here in Georgia. Now, what do you do if you come across a fish that has whirling disease? Let's say you catch one, or you see one in the water or on the shore that you could potentially net and get out of the water system. The answer is do that. Get it out of the waterway. Get it out, take it far away from the bank and terminate that animal. You don't want these things dying in the waterway because that is the point at which the parasite releases. So if you come across one here in Georgia or anywhere else, the right thing to do is to remove that animal from the waterway and terminate it. That's really all it is for today, guys. Do you deal with whirling disease where you are? I'd love to hear from you if you do. Do you have it in your local waterways? What do you do when you come across a fish infected by whirling disease? Do you remove it and terminate it? Tell me. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you haven't been here before, I would really appreciate it if you go down a little bit south and maybe hit that subscribe button and that like button. Tell your friends about the channel. That would be super cool. It would mean the world to me. And for those of you that have already subscribed, my dad and I, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. But let me hear from you, like I said, in the comments. Tell me about your experience, if any, with whirling disease, and we will see you on the next video.